All over the world, there are stories of migrant workers suffering from abuse and exploitation. Among these victims, one group is prominent: Filipino domestic workers. Leaving their country to work abroad, they often experience extremely bad and appalling treatment. Such violence does not only happen on the other side of the planet. Filipino domestic workers are struggling all over the world, including in Europe. And behind closed doors, this also takes place here, in London. This looks like a nice Sunday lunch, but these people share more than just food. They are all Filipino domestic workers who, in the past, suffered from abuse and were rescued. Now they gather every week to support each other and help others in their position through the Filipino Domestic Workers Association.
We now have 285 members, and 90% of those are migrant domestic workers. They came from the Middle East and the Far East.
The members of the association often put up newly rescued victims of abuse to help them until they can find a place to live. Vilma is one of those who benefited from this.
I arrived in the UK in 1997 with my Kuwaiti employer. They employed me from Kuwait, that brought me here. The contract I had, that I meant to get £120 per week wages, but they only gave me £90 a month. I have to work 8 hours every day, 16 hours every day, and look after 4 children.
The association doesn't just organise meals. They also plan meetings to explain to the victims what their rights are. Jennifer attends those meetings. She explains why she had to leave the Philippines in the first place.
It's about how can I support my family? How can I send my children to school? Because I don't have job in Philippines, and my ex-husband before, also he's still studying, so it was quite very hard life. So I decided to, to do something for my children and for my family.
Phoebe escaped her employers years ago, but she still remembers the inhuman conditions in which she had to work.
Work is 24 hours. There is no days off. Anytime they will need you, they will call you, even if it's in the middle of the night.
Since 2012, the law about domestic workers has changed in the UK. Their visa is now directly linked to their employers, which means they cannot leave them without losing their right to stay in the UK. Mr. Shirali Lakani is the head of the Immigration and Civil Litigation Department at AKL Solicitors. He explains what this law means for domestic workers.
They will have to go to the police to report this, and often it's very difficult for that person then to, the problem with that is that if they go and report their employer, then they're out of the house because they can't go back in that house. And because of that danger that they've got nowhere else to go, they got no money, and their immigration status will be in jeopardy as well, because once they report their employer, that means they are no longer under that visa, and so the visa condition is, so they will have to leave. The problem with that is, of course, if they have to leave the country, they don't have any money to leave, they don't have their passports, and often they don't want to leave because they've got families back home who needs money from these people. So they are trapped in this system, and it's not possible. It's only very few who surface.
When they came from that country to the UK, they only have 6 months visa. So that 6 months visa, if they happen to be considered as victims of trafficking, and then they have to wait for the government to approve or to decide on their case, and they will be considered as really trafficked and will be given leave. It's like discretionary leave of a year or more.
This Filipino girl was brought into the UK. She was made to work 14 hours a day. Obviously, because the UK government, before allowing a domestic worker, requires the employer to confirm that the person will be paid minimum wage and they'll be given accommodation and all sorts of the requirement for lawful employment. However, in practice, that's not possible, or that doesn't follow every time. And for example, this girl's passport was taken away. In fact, she was told, you don't need to keep a passport, you are a slave and you must keep, the passport is with us. She was made to walk every day with the children of the family, to take them to park, but they would only give money for the children and no food for her. So she would only get food when she gets home, and very little food. She was not paid anything at all. Whenever she demanded that she needs to make payment because she's got her own children back in Philippines who needs to be fed, and she needs to send money back home for the kids to be looked after by third parties. And she was told, you have to wait for the money. And it was very difficult for her to actually report this matter.
Pretty hard. But I trust in God. I said, like, in every storm there's always a rainbow. So I always hold on to that.
Filipinos are indeed believers and gather every Sunday at church for a mass and meals. Dalia also suffered from terrible abuses and has not been able to visit her children back in the Philippines for more than 8 years.
24/7, there is no off. Even though if daytime you cannot rest, because they want to see you that you are always working, moving, yeah. And they have a big family, so some of their children, they get married, and they will brought me there, the other house, to clean and cook and to stay the children, something like that. It's so tired, difficult.
We had a member who was actually who actually undergone a medical checkup because she was raped by her employer here, and some of our members were even physically abused. Like they were, thrown things on their face, their bodies, like that, suffered verbal abuse.
The children are really, really naughty. They tend to beat you, kick you, shout at you. They don't treat you well because they believe that we are their slaves.
They threw me the remote control because of this food that I didn't make to him because it's not available to the market. He's really angry, and I was scared because especially he told me that I can kill you and I will throw you to the sea.
It's slavery because they work and they should be paid the minimum wage or more and have access to health care. They were abused, and it seems that the government has no way of monitoring these migrant domestic workers who work behind closed doors. They work in a private household, and they are being victimized by these exploitative employers, and there is no help.
Modern slavery is people who are either brought in here, for example, domestic workers, or modern slavery is not just necessarily people brought from abroad. Also, there is modern slavery here. People, for example, on the streets, homeless people abuse them and pretends that they are going to be giving them shelter, but actually they use them, they held them against their own will, and by giving them work for, like, for example, 7 days a week with little or no money, and often they are being just given drugs or cheap cider, in order to make sure that they continue to be under their control and they are in the wrong habits. And there is a specific definition in the law of what is modern slavery. A person commits an offense if the person holds another person in slavery or servitude, and the circumstances are such that the person knows or ought to know that the other person is held in slavery or servitude, or the person requires another person to perform forced or compulsory labor, and the circumstances are such that the person knows or ought to have known that the other person is being required to perform forced or compulsory labor.
They are slaves, the modern slaves of the modern times.
Following Dalia's story about her employers from Qatar, the Qatari embassy in London was contacted in order to get a response, but without any success. The Filipino government actually acted recently after a young Filipino woman was found dead in Kuwait, killed by her employers. The Filipino president Rodrigo Duterte ordered Filipino domestic workers in Kuwait come back to the Philippines, offering for the government to pay for their flights. He forbade domestic workers to go to Kuwait.
On their return.
I want a total ban, and they can come here and we'll have to support them.
The ban was eventually lifted not long after in order to pacify relationships with Kuwait following a diplomatic crisis. Fortunately, these women have now managed to come to a better place. They found employers treating them well and have obtained the right to stay in the UK.
It's very easy to find a job back then. I had a visa and I applied, after a year I applied for a residency because I was covered with that. I was just lucky enough to get that. Work-wise it was okay because you get lots of living in job, nanny job, housekeeping. So it was pretty easy to find a job back then.
Working condition is better. Yeah, I work 7 hours in a day, and I have weekends off. But because in my contract, I agreed to work on Saturdays and Sundays if my employers are here. So it's only if they are here I have to give them breakfast and do the beds. But that's it.
A good Indian Muslim family have one son.
Okay.
I was with them for almost 2 years now. I'll be 2 years on September.
Yeah, I have job, and I get my employer as well, and we have a contract now.
Okay.
Yeah, and she helped me a lot about this problem.
I've got a big room, nice. We have a cleaner who will change my bed sheets.
Because here you can, if you don't like the work that you have, then especially if you have the visa, then you can change employer. You can find a new one which suits you.